The streets can be a dangerous place, especially at night. The darkness conceals many things, and for those who walk these streets, the shadows can be both a refuge and a threat. But for some, danger lurks even in broad daylight. The hustle and bustle of the city can mask the sinister undercurrents that flow just beneath the surface. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Vancouver's downtown east side was one such place. A neighborhood teetering on the edge, where the line between safety and peril was often blurred. It was a neighborhood known for its poverty, drug use, and sex work. The streets were lined with the forgotten and the forsaken, people struggling to survive in a world that seemed to have turned its back on them. It was also a place where women were disappearing, vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only questions and heartache. At first, it was just a trickle. A few women here and there, their absences barely noticed amidst the chaos of the streets. A woman here, another one there, gone without a trace. Their faces stared out from missing person posters, silent pleas for help that often went unanswered. Most of the missing were drug-addicted sex workers. Women who had already been pushed to the margins of society, their lives deemed less valuable by those in power. Women living on the margins of society. Their struggles were invisible to many, their disappearances even more so. Their disappearances often went unreported, unnoticed, uninvestigated. The system failed them, time and time again. As the years passed, the trickle became a steady stream. More and more women vanished, their numbers growing with each passing month. The number of missing women climbed higher and higher. Each new disappearance added to the growing sense of dread and despair. The community grew increasingly alarmed. Families and friends of the missing women demanded answers, their voices rising in a chorus of grief and anger. Where were these women going? What was happening to them? The questions hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just out of sight. What was happening to them? Theories and rumors swirled, each more terrifying than the last. The Vancouver Police Department faced mounting pressure to solve the disappearances. Theories abounded. Some speculated that a serial killer was stalking the streets, preying on the vulnerable. Some speculated that a serial killer was stalking the streets, a predator hiding in plain sight waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Others believed the women had simply drifted away, lost to their addictions or new lives. But those who knew them best refused to believe they would just disappear without a word. The truth, as it often does, proved far more sinister. The reality of what happened to these women was a nightmare beyond anyone's worst fears. The break in the case came in 2002, a year that would forever be etched in the annals of criminal history. Acting on a tip from an informant, police executed a search warrant at a seemingly ordinary pig farm in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. This farm, sprawling over acres of rural land, belonged to Robert William Pickton. Pickton was a quiet, unassuming man, known to his neighbors as a simple pig farmer. He lived on the farm with his brother, raising pigs and occasionally hosting large, raucous parties that drew people from all over. To the outside world, Pickton was just another farmer. No one would have suspected him of being capable of the horrors that lay hidden on his property. What police discovered on that farm shocked even the most seasoned investigators, leaving them reeling from the sheer scale of the atrocities. The property was littered with the gruesome evidence of multiple murders, a macabre testament to the evil that had taken place there. Human remains in various states of decomposition were scattered throughout the farm, hidden in the most unexpected places. Some of the remains were buried in shallow graves, hastily covered with dirt and debris. Others were shockingly mixed in with pig feed, a gruesome detail that horrified the investigators. The smell of death hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the unspeakable acts that had been committed on this farm. As the investigation unfolded, the true extent of Pickton's crimes began to emerge, painting a chilling picture of a man who had managed to hide his monstrous deeds behind a facade of normalcy. The community of Port Coquitlam was left in shock, grappling with the realization that such evil had been lurking in their midst. Memorials and vigils were held for the victims, as the community came together to mourn and seek justice for those who had been lost. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Canadian history, as the world watched in horror at the revelations of Pickton's heinous acts. In the end, justice was served, but the scars left by the farm of horrors would remain forever etched in the memories of all who were touched by this tragedy. The investigation revealed the horrifying truth about Robert Pickton. He was a serial killer who had been preying on vulnerable women from Vancouver's downtown east side for years. Pickton would lure the women to his farm with promises of drugs or money. Once there, he would murder them and dispose of their bodies by feeding them to his pigs. How could a killer like Pickton operate for so long without detection? There were systemic failures at every level. The police were slow to react to the disappearances. They dismissed the missing women as addicts and prostitutes. They failed to connect the dots. Pickton was arrested in 2002 and charged with the murders of 26 women. His trial began in 2007. It was one of the most complex and disturbing trials in Canadian history. The evidence against Pickton was overwhelming. DNA evidence linked him to the victims. Witnesses testified about his violent behavior and his obsession with killing. The trial was a harrowing ordeal for the families of the victims. They had to sit through weeks of graphic testimony and gruesome evidence. They had to relive the pain of their loved ones' disappearances, and they had to face the man accused of taking them away. The trial of Robert Pickton. The trial was a media spectacle. Reporters from around the world descended on the courthouse. The public was captivated by the gruesome details of the case. Pickton, for his part, remained largely emotionless throughout the trial. He showed no remorse for his crimes. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence against Pickton. They called dozens of witnesses, including former friends and associates of Pickton, who testified about his violent behavior and his obsession with killing. They also presented DNA evidence linking Pickton to the victims. Guilty as charged. The courtroom was filled with tension as the trial of Robert Pickton reached its climax. The defense team, determined to prove their client's innocence, presented their case with fervor. The defense argued that the police had framed Pickton. They insisted that the investigation was flawed and that the authorities had been too eager to pin the crimes on him without sufficient evidence. They claimed that the evidence against him was circumstantial and that the real killer was still at large. The defense pointed to inconsistencies in the testimonies and suggested that the evidence had been mishandled or even planted. The jury didn't buy it. Despite the defense's efforts, the prosecution's case was compelling. The jury listened intently to the testimonies of the victims' families and the forensic experts who had meticulously pieced together the evidence. After deliberating for 10 days, they found Pickton guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and sorrow as the verdict was read. The families of the victims wept, knowing that justice had been served, but also mourning the loss of their loved ones. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The sentence was a small comfort to the families, but it ensured that Pickton would never walk free again. Pickton was never tried for the murders of the other 20 women he was initially charged with. The decision not to proceed with those charges left many questions unanswered and many families without closure. The Crown prosecutor decided that it was not in the public interest to proceed with those charges, as Pickton was already serving the maximum sentence possible under Canadian law. This decision was met with mixed reactions, with some feeling that justice had been only partially served, while others believed it was the most pragmatic approach given the circumstances. Scars on the soul. The Pickton case had a profound impact on the community of Vancouver's downtown east side. It shattered the illusion that even the most vulnerable members of society are safe. It exposed the dark underbelly of a city often portrayed as a peaceful paradise. For the families of the victims, the guilty verdict brought a measure of justice, but it could not bring back their loved ones. The pain of their loss will never go away. They will forever live with the knowledge of the horrific way in which their loved ones died. Never again. The Pickton case is a stark reminder of the importance of protecting the vulnerable. It is a call to action for all of us to be more vigilant in our communities, to speak out against injustice, to demand better from our law enforcement agencies. We must never forget the victims of Robert Pickton. We must honor their memory by working to prevent such tragedies from happening again. We must create a society where everyone feels safe and valued, where no one is left behind. Section 9, A Shared Responsibility. The case of Robert Pickton is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the shadows. It is a story of loss, grief, and the fight for justice. But it is also a story about the importance of community, resilience, and the unwavering belief that even in the face of unimaginable horror, hope can endure. We must learn from the mistakes that were made. We must hold those in power accountable. And we must never ever stop fighting for a world where every life is valued and protected. The memory of the victims demands nothing less.